Hello and welcome to the Avant In. I am one of your hosts, Topher Wagner.
And I'm another host, Jerome Allen.
We are doomscrolling the news so that you don't have to.
And today we have an amazing, an astonishing, a beautiful, she's perfect, she's beautiful, she's a model, Camilla!
Hi folks, how's it going? Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's
You are now pod friend number 2.
Yeah.
Yay,
Three.
cool.
Three.
Friend of the pod number 3.
Yeah.
Friend of the pod number 3 in the books. Hell yeah.
So Camilla, what do you do in life? What's your thing?
Oh God. Okay. Well, currently, I'm a graduate student at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, and I'm just doing a certificate program in community leadership. So it's a really awesome. Of course, it's CUNY, so it's a progressive leaning curriculum that deals with nonprofit management and governance, community theory, community organizing theory and praxis. A fieldwork component is in there too, and I'm also taking like an elective on systems of mass incarceration. So it all comes together into this like beautiful approach to getting closer to movement work and community work. And separate from school, I'm also a fellow at the New York City Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. And just like, supporting my boss in a whole bunch of different labor policy initiatives and what, dealing with the implementation processes of like all of that, which has been a challenge just because I'm so used to working in nonprofit spaces or in partisan spaces where you can be like, yes, like this is my political opinion and this is what I want to see in the world and this is the best way to go about X, Y, and Z. And working in a government space is not necessarily, reflective of that. And that's been interesting.
Have you seen de Blasio?
No. I have not seen Bill.
Not Bill.
I'm not gonna, comment on that.
See, this is a perfect example. You're like, well, I have opinions, but I'm not going to comment on it.
Exactly. I have opinions, but I signed a contract before I started my fellowship that literally outlines and says, I will not embarrass the mayor of New York City.
Wow.
Are we supposed to just like be quiet about maybe some of the more problematic issues? I guess so. Or like we're challenged to approach them in a different, less embarrassing way. Don't know what that means. But
or is it them trying to tell you like don't embarrass yourself because that will reflect poorly on the mayor?
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
God,
it's
don't
very
ask me on
vague.
Instagram Live. Yeah, it's super vague. Like no, I'm not gonna go on a social media rage craze, but
I'm be honest, I don't think
weird
I ever realized like how academic community organizing and just like all of that actually is. Like I kind of thought people just did it out of, I mean, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, like in a lot of social movements were people just kind of winging it, or has this been like a well-studied theory for a while?
Well, I think a lot of, first of all, our ancestors have been organizing and resisting since the beginning of time. So it's not, I think the academic piece has definitely grown and evolved and is helpful in like, you learn about theories or strategies that work in certain places in certain contexts. You learn how to analyze power around you and walk into spaces with that kind of mindset. But it also, has become a part of this weird larger issue of like gatekeeping in community organizing spaces where it's like, oh, well, if you're not as well versed in Alinsky theory about organizing, then like you're not allowed into this space. And the academic component certainly like presents a barrier to entry into organizing, which is unfortunate because organizing in and of itself is something that should be accessible to everyone and has been in the past. But it's the learning curve that has been, academic, like has grown into this academic space.
Do you find yourself like catching people and telling them like stop gatekeeping in some of your work?
I mean, for sure. And that's kind of been the biggest like barrier for me. Um, because, my first job out of college was at a nonprofit, and we did some, organizing aspect. There were some organizing aspects to my role in particular, but it's like an advocacy organization that does great work. And that does like direct service work. I told you about Gares, and we give, or we gave, I gave legal services and naturalization guidance, for example, for people who wanted to become citizens. And you'll find organizers saying like direct service work like is kind of useless. It doesn't really change anything. It just like accepts the status quo and doesn't really fight for any systemic change. All you're doing is responding to systemic oppression. It's like calling it like a band-aid as opposed to actually like healing the wound. And I just find that so hurtful and wrong. And like, the two can exist and have to exist and work together in order to achieve systemic change, because we can't just like what are you gonna help an asylum seeker file their asylum visa? Like, who's gonna do that work? It's important work. It just has to be in conjunction.
Definitely. It just made me think, like, if you like fall and like skid your knee on the concrete, the person who's like, okay, we need to replace this concrete with like something softer is not helping you with your skid knee. Like, you still need someone to come by with the Band-Aid.
Exactly.
So,
and that is the key. That's the key to our collective liberation, guys.
Replace the concrete.
We just cracked the code, guys.
We did.
We fixed society.
Oh God, Joe Biden, listen up.
I found some of my, speaking of Joey B, in the sky, I found myself getting frustrated with. So it started with like the refugee like numbers. Like I don't know if you saw this, but the Biden administration wanted to keep it at the same numbers as the Trump administration. And then progressives were saying like, that's not the promise you made on the campaign trail. And then they walked back on that. And then we saw the student loan thing. Like, no, we're not going to do $50,000. We can't cover Yale students. And then walked back on that. Like, do you think the Biden administration is as responsive as it's leaning to be, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Biden campaign was forced to, present itself, at least during the election, as this huge like nexus, this connector between progressive and moderate Dem thinking. So like he tried to throw progressives a couple of bones to be like, see, it's not that bad to vote for me. Like, this is something that we all have to do. And progressives did that. We rallied around Biden, accepted Bernie's loss, and did the damn thing, right? We won. And now, I think the only people who are surprised by this backtracking are moderates. Progressives, I feel, are just like, well, like, it's what we were saying all along. We knew this was a possibility. Which is why, Bernie forever. But, that ship has sailed, and now it's time to start thinking about next steps and what we want the face of progressive politics to look like in this country too. We have to get our shit together as well.
That's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that.
And it's also hard to like balance this very real like an acknowledgement that government just moves so slowly. And the issue is that so many of these like insidious problems that we have in our country feel really urgent, and things build on top of each other, and we're living in a very like publicly violent time. I think we've always lived with violence. Black and brown people, for example, have always lived with police brutality. This is not anything new, but it's particularly compounded when we see video and death after death being publicized. So it feels really urgent to us. And when government can't make solutions happen, in, you know, that kind of is in line with that urgency, then we get frustrated and we, you know, turn to issues of accountability and X, Y, and Z and blah, 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 which are also very true and real. But like, we do have to acknowledge that maybe government, you know, we can't put all of our eggs in one Biden basket.
That's a good point.
You
I mean, I
know?
guess why like it's about investing in communities more than it is about it investing in the government. But
Or in the federal government at least. Like, I think
oh yeah,
local government is the way to go, where we should start.
you're located in Washington D.C.
I
and
am
recently they voted on the D.C. state bill again. How are you feeling about this? How about it moving forward?
so hopeful. I was born and raised in DC. You know that.
Yeah.
I'm a Ward
Wow.
1 uptown girl through and through.
Hey.
Hey, Salvi Pally from Washington DC. So, you know,
Wait, I love that. I've never heard you say that. Salvi Pally.
Salvi Pally, Salvi girl, Pally girl. Um,
I don't even get it.
Oh, she's Salvadorian and Palestinian.
Oh, Salvi Pally. Okay.
yeah, Salvi
I love
Pally.
it.
Um, I'm so hopeful. I hope it happens. And I'm thankful that, like, you know, the racial justice piece of DC statehood is kind of coming to the forefront of the dialogue, because it is a racial justice issue. Like, we would be the only state that is majority Black per capita, with representation in Congress, and it would be just like a real improvement, as far as, you know, voicing policy needs that are so real in Washington DC that, you know, often get acknowledged by our local government but then get cut off because Congress has control of our budget.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So, you know, it's ridiculous.
when I was living in DC, I found that tension so weird of like we appeal to local government, but we can't do much other than appeal to the actual Congress to get things
Yeah.
done. It's just so strange.
Yeah. And like, you know, in other states, it's so clear this, you know, local to state to federal pipeline, this, you know, idea of like, okay, well, if I can't get something done on the local level, I'm going to appeal to the state. And if I can't get something done at the state level, I'm going to go all the way to Congress and testify. And, you know, like, there's just so many avenues that you can take to really uplift your community when you have representation in Congress. But, you know, Washington, D.C. has just, we've never had that. We've never experienced that. And it is in part what makes Washington, D.C. a really difficult place to live for some people. You know, people forget that DC is like the epicenter of the crack cocaine war in this country. It was the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic. It's just, you know, we have a lot of recovery that we need to embark on, and statehood is just the way to go.
What is the actual downside? Like, obviously, most of the Republicans, all of their reasons for not supporting the bill are just sort of excuses for their own racist policies. But like, is there actually any solid like con to adding more states? Like, because we have a lot of territories that we could just keep throwing into this mix, right?
I learned that North Dakota, South Dakota, Arkansas, and some other states were added purely just to add votes to the Republican Party in the 1800s.
It's all just
It's not the first time we've done
politics. Yeah. It's
yeah.
insane.
Well, yeah, and that's, you know, that knowledge, like, Republicans know that.
Right.
And that's the threat, is that they just don't want to add to more Dem votes. But also, you know, it's like this weird American fascination or concern with changing our founding documents. Like, the big issue would be that if DC were to become a state, we would have to include a new amendment to the Constitution that changes its status from a federal district, so it's not a territory, it's a federal district,
Right.
to a state. And altering the Constitution requires just a lot of bureaucratic work. The Republicans obviously just don't want to do.
Yeah.
No.
It's like you just don't want to put in the work, probably, and that's the shame, because it's about enfranchising people, which is not bad.
That is not what
Fundamentally, we
I
can
mean,
draw that line.
Right.
given the restrictive voter ID laws that are just like getting making it's being rained on by the Republicans, I doubt that they're about enfranchising anyone.
Yeah, it's so hard. I don't know. I'm feeling hopeful that statehood dialogue is becoming, more mainstream and is gaining more attention, but I don't it probably won't pass in the Senate, which has always been the number one obstacle. So sometimes it'd be like that. We're just
True.
gonna have to keep working and working and working until the Senate, agrees.
What so you're working for the mayor's office in NYC. Do you
Hmm.
see any parallels between the NYC office and the DC mayor?
When you're the mayor of any major city, there's just so much on your plate and so many things to deal with. The thing is this: New York City is huge.
Yeah.
Okay. It is so large. There's like something like 40 plus government agencies alone that are like or not government agencies, mayor's office agencies that like branch out into a whole different other like system that I can't even begin to explain how hard it was for my little Washingtonian mind to like wrap around. Like, oh my God. Um, Washington, D.C. is small, and we have a small government. The thing about Muriel Bowser is that she occupies this very specific space where she likes to say that she's a progressive mayor, similar to Bill de Blasio and other progressive cities. But she's just so development oriented in the capitalist sense that like most of her policies, when it comes to like, like stimulating Washington's economy or, housing policy in Washington, D.C., she'll give contracts to these huge developers with no concern for DC labor rights or the incredibly gentrifying effects of development in Washington, D.C. and what that means. And I think New York City is paying a lot more attention to that specifically. And New York City, I think, has just this amazing incoming or growing space for progressive politics, because it is so big and there's like just so many opportunities to be progressive.
True.
Like the community hiring legislation that just passed. I'm not sure if you all know about it, but my office has been working on it, and it requires big time developers in New York City to hire a certain amount of people work for their workforce from the local community.
That's good.
Which means that money will be put back into the local community that is expected to support and sustain, that huge development. Washington, D.C. has nothing of that kind of legislation. And it's a bummer because DC is such a transient city anyway that we just really need those kinds of protections. New York City still has like an amazing population of people who were born and raised in New York, who are proud of where they live, and like will probably live in New York for the rest of their lives because they can't. Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Not to say that New York's not gentrifying either, because it definitely is. But we know that.
It's interesting you bring that up because one of the major issues, I don't know if they've changed it yet, but like that people were bringing up last summer was the fact that a lot of NYPD cops don't live in New York City. They live in Long Island, they live in New Jersey, they live in Yonkers, and then come into the city and police communities, and hence like why there's such like piss poor rapport.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing specifically about policing. It's interesting. Washington, D.C. changed their policing policy in 91 to have like this weird race-based policy where like Latino officers police Latino neighborhoods, Black officers police Black neighborhoods, and white officers police everyone.
Nice.
What?
Truth bomb. But it, whatever, like culturally competent policing. And this happened after the 1991 Mount Pleasant police brutality riots, when which Mount Pleasant is my neighborhood, and it's this like beautiful combination of like immigrant activism and like granola-esque vibes. But anyway, so there was this man who was handcuffed, who was supposedly lying on the sidewalk like this and was shot in the chest by a police officer, by a Black police officer and her white partner who was around there. And so of course Mount Pleasant popped off, and then DC changed their policing policy to include this weird like race-based walk the beat initiative, and lo and behold, it didn't work anyway. Black and brown people are still criminalized at the same rates. It doesn't necessarily matter what race a police officer is, because as long as he's wearing his badge, Black and brown communities cannot, open themselves up in this like responsiveness that's expected from them. Like, oh, just because a Latino officer is like approaching me, I'm supposed to feel safer or, more attuned or supportive of his presence. Like, no, that's ridiculous.
It's still a violent presence.
It's still violent, and it's still threatening to me.
Right.
That's the point. It's still about power. It's not about what the officer looks like.
Well, I've also heard, like, I guess when people talk about community policing, one of the main things I hear is that like they want the officers to live in the actual neighborhood the specific neighborhood that they're policing, so that they actually know the people that they're serving, which I guess goes a little bit beyond just like, oh, you look like them, so you must be able to understand and connect with them. It's very different from them actually like getting to know the people that their neighbors.
I can get behind that if it also included demilitarization of the police. I think that's the major component.
I mean, no matter what, even if someone comes to your door, with cupcakes saying I'm your new neighbor, they have a gun on their hip, there's still intimidation involved. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the term community policing has been co-opted by people who don't believe in defunding the police or demilitarizing the police, and they'll say like, this is the solution, this is the best alternative, but it doesn't address the power discrepancy, right? So we can't fall back on that one particular niche solution that people like to throw in our face. I think abolition is the only way forward.
Yep.
How involved is the mayor's office in all of the police reform like we've seen in New York lately, like the qualified immunity and stuff like that? Is that all like the state legislator, or how does that work? Isn't that more?
I can't really answer that question in a super informed way. I work at the workforce development office, so I do a lot of just labor work. So my boss is Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, who is actually super rad and cool. I really recommend people look into his past work and with labor policies specifically. Like, he's just very forward thinking, and it's cool to see a Black deputy mayor, actually enacting interesting policy.
I think there's only been one Black mayor, and that was like in the early 90s, before NYC specifically.
I remember people in Chicago were so excited about Lori Lightfoot. That excitement has gone down the drain.
There's one thing, like, if there's one thing I know about the upcoming mayoral race, is that whoever we elect, we're all gonna hate them. Like, New Yorkers are just gonna hate the mayor, and that's why we have all these deputy mayors that we can praise and pick apart what they do. But like, the mayor is just always gonna suck.
Yeah, you don't have to answer this, but are you excited to work for Andrew Yang?
Don't say that. Gross, Jerome. Wakala. You know, oh
You gotta at least
God.
think about it. It's a possibility.
I hope it's
Please
no.
no. Please no. I hope no. It's as a private citizen, Andrew Yang maybe has like one or two interesting ideas, but can you run New York City? Probably not. Are
It's,
you qualified to be a president? Certainly not.
Oh, but being qualified doesn't
Doesn't matter
disqualify you anymore, right?
I guess there's room for everybody.
Country. It's like too much.
So I was reading this. There was some like I guess theory essay published like 25 years ago called like The Fourth Turning. I was just reading about this, and they like predicted that in 2020 there was going to be like massive social unrest, and then that was going to be the time where like the next Green Deal or the next New Deal comes out, and the boomers like finally like relinquish some of the power. Are we approaching that where like the 30-year-old liberal millennials are going to start like doing their thing instead of whatever the boomers have been doing for so long?
I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene's, is leading the charge.
Yeah, it just doesn't look like that's really happening. It
Don't
seems
speak
like
her
every
name either. Okay, this is Voldemort stuff. I think not so much millennials, but the generation after us, Gen Z, is the generation that's going to usher in this new phase that you're talking about. I think millennials are still very attached to the dialogues and modes of discourse that we've inherited from boomers.
yeah.
I think we're just a little too close to them to really like enact that change, but millennials and Gen Z working together, I think will make all of that happen. It's also a matter of reframing and curating narratives around something like the Green New Deal. That comes with organizing and changing faces of power, for sure.
Do you consider yourself a young millennial or an old Gen Zer?
What's that term? Isn't there a term for that? That's like some people born between 94 and 98 are like zillennials or something like
okay.
that.
Wow.
Well, we need that.
We've been looking for a
trying
term.
to define
Yeah. Yeah, zillennial. When I read that, I was like, oh, it's me.
Yeah.
Because I have Gen Z. Well, I have a friend or two who was born in 98. And I, really appreciate and love and need the energy that they bring me,
Mm-hmm.
And older millennials are so different from me in other respects too. So
yeah. I can feel the disconnect on both sides as far as like,
yeah.
oh, you're slightly just different, like you're just raised in a different culture. But definitely the older millennials now seem fully out of touch for me. Like they all seem like Andrew Yang supporters. So
Yeah, they voted for gay marriage and they
just
said
very simple.
Great.
That's fine now.
Legalize gay marriage.
Don't have to touch that anymore. Gay rights are won.
Capitalism loves the gays now. So
oh my gosh. Seeing the
Harmful.
banks in DC Pride were like so weird. Like
I'm sorry.
the banks and the bank
Yeah.
floats in DC Pride.
Bank of America now.
Bank of America loves the queers.
Yeah, corporate queerdom is
Corporate queer. Okay.
Before you know it, like Wells Fargo is going to be like sponsoring drag queens and like
They
that's
probably already are.
I
happening.
mean, yeah, like going back to the zillennial thing, like the way that I operate in my life, or that like how I envision where I am in between these generations, is that like I have a TikTok, but I don't post TikTok, but I love TikTok. Like I will scroll and love all the shit that little Gen Zers are putting out. Like word, yes, consuming, absorbing, taking in, but I will never post a TikTok in my life.
See, we had this argument once we were talking about Gen Z, and I was playing the bitter millennial version. I'm like, I'm never gonna download TikTok. Like, I don't even want to see it. I just don't get it.
It's fun little, like, I could watch it for hours. Like,
Well, that's the problem, right?
okay, true.
And it's like elevated memery, you
Right,
know?
True.
Like it's just more like memes and video version are my favorite. And
Right,
so
memes
that's
with
where
even
I
more info and more context and
get.
and more engagement because people like they do like duets and stuff, right? Like they see someone's TikTok and then like TikTok their TikTok.
Yeah, like meme over a meme over a meme.
Memeception.
This makes me think of the "Call Me by Your Name" Little Nas X moment, and I'm curious about what you thought about that because we had satanic panic during a pandemic, something we haven't had in centuries.
I love it. I'm all here for it. I
Satanic panic, we stand.
I love, yes, 100%. I don't know if you saw a picture I posted on my story on Instagram, but I used to be a little goth, emo, brown girl.
I love that.
Yeah, wait, hold on.
I
There's
feel
a
like
picture
every
around
progressive
for you,
was
but
a scene kid once. I feel like that's what we're coming to the
yeah.
conclusion on the cast.
And like the scene, goth, whatever, satanic scene, as it were, or space, allows for all different kinds of identities, like if you want to be queer and goth, then you're allowed to be, and you can do that. And Lil Nas X was like, I'm gonna fucking dance on a pole and give Satan a lap dance.
Yes.
The most
And
metal
it's so
thing.
radical.
Yeah.
But it wasn't even really that inherently Satanist because he kills Satan in the end.
Yeah, which is even more powerful. Power
Yeah.
building by Lil Nas X. Like
He's a genius.
he is a genius, and I will give him my money. So
Definitely.
how it has to go.
Maybe not for those sneakers, but
Oh, the
that's
blood-
just a little too
blood
much for
shoes.
me.
I have been considering though buying Cardi B's Reebok line.
She has a
just
Reebok
because-
line?
Yeah, she has like 2 Reebok shoes out.
Wow.
They're pretty cute. I just really love Cardi B too. I think she has been the victim and center of like conservative vitriol and anger, and I love how she reacts to it and how she brings generally informed opinions to the front. Also with WAP too, like conservatives were
Yeah.
freaking out about her WAP performance at the Grammys. And they were saying like this is contributing to the moral downfall of America. And there's like congressional testimony of like congressmen talking about Cardi B's Grammy stuff.
Insane. Her career has been like exposing a lot of weird double standards, especially in the WAP situation. Definitely makes sense because like hip hop has always been hypersexualized in like a much more toxic
the
way.
male gaze.
Yeah, but on top of that, I know like her fans have like not necessarily her fans, but like I guess like people that enjoy hip hop have been like mad at her for doing all these like shoe lines and all these like sponsorships and business things instead of making more music. But that's also always been the case with every like big hip hop star. They become like a mogul who starts trying to like expand their brand and their business.
Jay-Z and Beyonce's like income, I think, is only 10% from music.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it only becomes a problem when a Black woman or a brown woman does it unapologetically. Like, and when she is like unapologetically business money oriented. Why? Because she was poor as fuck and has like gone through probably so much trauma that the public will never be aware of. And is so proud of her, like of the space that she takes up, and that's so admirable and rad and cool, and that's why I'm a Cardi B fan. I just love her unapologetic attitude about everything, and she knows that she's a savvy businesswoman. She wants to make money, so good, let her do that. Should she pay tons of taxes? Yes, but
Of course. I mean, I hope she would. She like supported Bernie Sanders, right?
True,
Yeah,
true.
and that gives me hope and confidence. I will say there's like something to be said about getting rid of celebrity culture and like putting celebrities on pedestals, but
So
yeah.
I have a question. Feel free to tell me again if you're not informed on this based on your position. But like, when the Amazon union battle was going on, we were talking about like, well, it didn't work there, but wouldn't it work in New York? Like,
Mm,
is there
There is a
any
Staten
reason why that it's not Is that
It's
happening?
happening in Staten Island, yeah.
Oh, okay.
yes, that
Is it more
Jerome
likely to
just
work here? You're saying?
mentioned. I mean, I think New York City generally and New York across the board has a really strong union culture. It's important to remember, though, that unionizing in and of itself or cooperative economics in and of themselves are not inherently progressive tools. So, like,
Mhm.
conservative groups can use them and unionize, and
I see.
progressives can
Right.
can use those tools and unionize. So, like, you'll find construction unions, for example, that are very conservative and that opt to put their power behind conservative initiatives or efforts. And so that's when, it becomes harmful and progressives are like, well, maybe like we're not so gung ho about cooperative economics. But the point is that we get our shit together enough so that we can meet them scale for scale
Mm.
and like address the very real ways that conservative power building has happened in this country. And it's that, say what you want about conservatives or whatever, they've done a damn good job of setting up these networks where like that are pretty impenetrable as far as getting legislation passed or as far as, even just, I don't know, like general local policies. They've been so organized and have used a lot of organizing tools that for some reason have progressive connotations. Like
Mm.
they've just done a damn good job. And I hate saying it. And then I don't know if I should say I'm impressed because it's not that impressive when you're working within a system that works for you anyway. It's not hard to figure out ways to exploit others when the system backs you. But we can meet them where they're at and we can like organize with the same tools that they have to create some space for us too. So I think New York, yeah, just to answer your question, New York is totally primed for a worker uprising,
That's
for
hopefully more
revolution.
progressively aimed because of just a more
Yeah,
progressive city.
yeah, and it's a progressive space. I think upstate obviously would look different.
Oh yeah.
Just across the board, rural communities versus cities are different in their political leanings. But in New York City and the New York City area, I think it's totally there. The groundwork has been laid.
I mean, it was disheartening to see the Alabama, the was Bessemer, Alabama, I think. I mean, the
Mhm.
fact that the anti-union effort like was all about like, well, a union can't actually help you get more money from Amazon, or they can't actually ensure that you'll get extra benefits and all these things. And it's like, but you trust Amazon over that? But I don't know. I guess, like
Yeah,
you
I
said,
feel
giving
that.
credit where credit is due, the union busting efforts were unfortunately really strong.
hmm I mean, it's just an issue of like power analysis. Like, what kind of power does my opponent have? What are the avenues through which they can exert that power onto me and change, how I respond or my asks, my list of demands. Um, it's really about luck and it's about strategy and planning and timing. Um, but it's also just about this like larger commitment that like even if you don't win one campaign, you still have to keep going and you have to be committed to the work because you're going to lose a lot, particularly in labor and labor rights. And it's about a willingness to remain proximate to the issues, regardless of what wins or losses you have.
Camilla, do you have anything you want to plug?
Shout out to the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. Shout out to the Community Semester Program and Educational Award. Free Palestine.
Yes.
DC Statehood Now. What else do we want to plug?
Shout out
Viva
to
El
the least
Salvador.
embarrassing mayor.
Shout out to the least embarrassing mayor, Bill de Blasio. We love you, Bill. Shout out to the most embarrassing mayor, Muriel Bowser. She is so embarrassing. Okay, I also want to just plug this.
Yeah.
Please. Okay, Jerome, I think I've shown you this video. You might have seen the video of Muriel Bowser clapping like a robot by herself.
Oh.
In Washington DC, she like tried to launch this whole like make noise for healthcare workers at 8 p.m. in your city and blah blah blah. No one in DC wanted to do this. Okay, so in order to promote it, she posted this video of herself. They're like literally crickets in the background, it's dead silent outside, and she's just clapping like this.
That is a meme.
For like a minute and a half. And
No,
she
we're
looks
definitely
like a
gonna
robot.
attach
We'll
it to this
include
one.
the entire video. The whole
Please,
minute and a half.
please. It's so funny. And it's everything wrong with Muriel. So
Thank you for listening to the Avant In. My name is Topher Wagner.
My name is Jerome Allen.
Thank you to our guest, Camilla. And our theme song is Men by Nyc Office. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us on all social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Camilla, you have a closing quote for us?
I did not come prepared with a closing quote.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.